Welcome to Todd Talk. Today I'm going to tell you about the time I broke my wrist.
Todd Talk is brought to you by Plexter Financial. Money, money, money.
I've never really considered myself an athletic person. When I was in grade school, I played Little League for a couple years. I played soccer for a couple of years. Later in life, I did a lot of running and I did a lot of backpacking and got a lot more active. But back in school, not so much. During high school, there's actually 3 things I did that were at all athletic. One of them is I was a cheerleader. So I was picking the girls up and getting stood on and, things like that. I was on the dance team, which was pretty novel at the time. There was only a couple guys on the team and, that was a lot of fun. And then the third thing was I tried out for the track and field team. I was a pretty lanky kid when I was in high school. And so what they thought I should do was pole vault. And so on the first day, they kind of showed us, this is how pole vaulting works. And then the next day, they had us try it out. Basically, we would kind of run with the pole, go up and over, just to get used to planting the pole and running with it, because it's a pretty big and awkward thing to try to maneuver, not to mention run with. So there was one time I was getting a little bit more confident, and I ran down the little runway, and I planted the pole, and I went up, and I went down sideways. And when you go sideways, there's a pole in your way, so you can't really put your legs down or reach out for anything. You just kind of go thud on the ground. And immediately I knew something was wrong. My left arm hurt really, really badly, and I kind of shook it off and, went on with my day. A little later in the evening, pretty much losing all mobility, and I'm starting to swell up in my left wrist. And so my mom and dad decided to take me to the hospital. And it turns out I broke a really weird bone, one of these tiny little bones in your wrist. And so I got put in a temporary cast and sent home. Now, this temporary cast was basically a bit of fiberglass that just sort of wrapped around your arm and hand to keep things immobilized. So I went home, went to bed, and that night was one of the worst nights I'd ever had up to that point in my entire life. The problem was that my arm couldn't bend this way, but I could do this. And being able to do that meant that the bone that was broken could move, and it felt like somebody was driving a nail through my wrist. Now, I knew we were going to the hospital the next day to get a permanent cast, and so I basically just sort of white-knuckled it through the entire night, and it was miserable. Next day we went in, and I got put in a cast, and my arm was kind of crooked, like this is how they had to set it. And I was in a cast up to my shoulder. That way I couldn't do this anymore, and I couldn't do this, and I couldn't do this. So I was kind of fixed in this position, and I was fixed in this position for almost 6 months. Turns out this little bone I decided to break in my wrist was really important to the growth and health of my hand, and so they needed to make sure that this thing healed properly. Now, this was back in the day when casts were still made out of plaster, so I had all kinds of drawings and people writing their names and things all over it. It was pretty cool looking. It was really tricky to sleep with this thing. It's like having a big log in bed with you that you had to kind of maneuver around. It was also really difficult to bathe. I had to kind of wrap a plastic bag around my arm every time I took a shower. The other thing is you'd get itches every once in a while because your arm is all sealed up and you're not exfoliating and there's nowhere for the sweat to go. You get these pretty itchy spots. And I ended up crafting this wire coat hanger that I could put down my bicep and it would just make the curve around my elbow. So after many months of having this thing on my arm, went into the doctor and finally had it cut off with one of those really cool saws that just kind of vibrates back and forth ever so slightly. So it doesn't cut through soft things like your skin. It only cuts through hard things, but it's still pretty unnerving to look at. They go down each side and they finally kind of crack this thing open like a peanut shell. And inside is this horror show. First, there's nowhere for your skin to go. So the palm of my hand, it looked like Night of the Living Dead, just caked on old dead skin that you could just kind of peel off in sheets. The other thing is every single little hair on your arm kind of grew up and back into the pore. So you just had all these little loops of hair all over your arm. And then finally, where I was taking that metal coat hanger and scratching my arm, the reason it was so itchy is because the metal coat hanger was cutting me. and there was dried blood all over the inside of this cast, where basically I was stabbing myself over and over, and then it would heal and get itchy. I would basically just stab it again. The weirdest thing is once you get your arm out of the cast and you know you are allowed to move it, it doesn't really want to move. Your joints kind of snap and crack and pop as you extend them because they've been sitting in this same position for so long. And your wrist to move it again was really, really difficult. There would be other painful events in my life, but fortunately, that's the only time I've ever broken a bone.